Today I wanted to share with you a wine that wine I really like. It's the Boneline's Cabernet Franc from the Amphitheatre Vineyard. The Boneline, to my mind, arguably New Zealand's best example of Cabernet Franc. And Cabernet Franc is not actually the easiest of varieties to grow and produce wine as a single varietal wine, because really ideally it needs a little bit of roundness and generosity that Merlot can give it. So it's only in quite ripe vintages that unless you like sort of very angular, very tight and slightly astringent sort of wines, there's not a lot of generosity to be had sometimes from the variety. What it does have, however, of course, is lovely perfume, good colour, good structure. So it makes a really nice sort of blending component normally, but this is a single varietal wine. And I think 2020, a very warm harvest and a really good example of how the right site in this North Canterbury region, where it is in the southern island of New Zealand, South Island, so not too far from Canterbury, within the North Canterbury region. This is from the Waipara Valley sub-region, and the thing is, in this part of the world, you can get, particularly during the winter, some really cold winds coming up from the Antarctic, and they can have some quite bitter winters. However, if you have a sheltered site during the summer, you can make some really lovely wines. There's an awful lot of aromatic whites being made there, sort of Rieslings, that sort of style of thing. Now, the amphitheatre, I think, as I say, sort of says it all really. This is a river terrace vineyard where they actually also grow Cabernet Sauvignon as well as Cabernet Franc, and it's surrounded by sort of a low hill of limestone there that sort of reflects heat back into the vineyard and shelters it from the cold winds. So a really, really good site. And particularly in 2020, which was possibly their earliest vintage so far, the vineyard was planted in, the first vines were planted in 1989. And some really nice ripeness in here, I think. So we'll have a look at that. As I say, they're called the Boneline. You'll find on the label there's an image of a fossil found there. Evidently this is referencing the limestone soils, which are full of prehistoric fossils. Evidently this is a penguin bone. So these old soils, here with, as I say, a gravel terrace, so nice and free draining, that sort of thing. What else should I tell you about this? The grapes are grown organically. They're hand-picked, they're gently destemmed, and during fermentation, malolactic conversion is actually encouraged during the ferment and while the wine is still macerating. One fascinating thing about this is that they actually have two batches of Cabernet Franc that they separate and vinify apart, and then blend about a year after vintage. And that is that they have some ungrafted vines and they have some grafted vines, both of Cabernet Franc, which are kept separate until, as I say, a year after picking. And I can't help thinking it would be fascinating to taste the two of those and see what, if any, difference results from being grafted or not. Anyway, so the wine spends about 16 months in barrel, of which only about 8% is new, so that's just softening it out. It's not necessarily giving oak flavours. Yeah, I think that sort of covers off the winemaking. Let's have a look at it, shall we? I mean, the first thing to note about this is a lovely depth of colour. This holds its colour right to the rim. It's got quite a vibrant purple note to the red, so it's a red-purple colour. It's not opaque. I can see the stem of the glass as I look down through it, but certainly there's a good intensity there. And let's have a smell and see what we think. Gosh, that illustrates really quite nicely the perfume that Cabernet Franc can show. It's sort of high-toned, violety perfume. I did wonder whether it was sort of peonies or not, but no, really a peony has a more rounded note. This is as I say, violet. That's that lifted, slightly dancing aroma. Maybe there's a little bit of cassis, blackcurrant, that sort of slightly leafiness, and leafiness is very typical of Cabernet Franc. This isn't overly methoxy. It doesn't smell too green, but there is that sort of, just as you get with sort of black currants or red currants, that herbal leafy note coming in there. There's some, you know, dark cherry fruit in there as well, and perhaps a more intense black fruit core, but as I say, it's that sort of lifted note that's most obvious to begin with. So let's taste it. On the palate, I think that's a very correct Cabernet Franc. Very fine tannins. It's still young, and the tannins are quite chalky and drying. They're not completely astringent, but yeah, the front of my mouth is drying out there, and that's counterpointed by really quite fresh, you know, mouth-watering acidity, and it makes the wine quite angular. You can see how the classic combination with Merlot, which would be juicier, rounder, perhaps a little more alcoholic, although this is 14.5%, so it does have some warmth on the back palate. Could fill it out and the two work together. Not that this isn't working, but it could add an extra dimension. There's a depth and a richness to this that is showing the warmth of the vintage. At the back, once you've got past the quite drying tannins, there's a lovely licoricey, rich, ripe core of fruit there. Again, you've got a cherry note, which is sort of high ripeness, red cherry through to black cherry, that sort of lifted note. There's not really the sort of the black curranty note that you might get with the Cabernet Sauvignon. And there are touches of graphite and a slight cedary sweet spice, maybe a touch of vanilla just from the oak, but not hugely obvious. Those are just sort of overtones in the background. The flavours are lasting well. As I say, the finish is quite angular. The tannins are drying it out a little bit at the very end there. So yeah, still a young wine, probably set to evolve for 2 or 3 years yet, but its richness and its ripeness is making it quite approachable now. A really nice example of a single varietal Cabernet Franc. Thank you very much for listening. Bye now.